This is Johnathon McDonald here, Head Analyst for Commercial and Ageing Aircraft at IBA, updating our freighter market outlook, 6th of November 2019. This has been a very interesting period in the freighter industry. Only recently announced at Cargo Facts 3 weeks ago, so that was middle of October 2019, that GECAS, Boeing and IAI had launched the Boeing 777-300ER P2F program with some firm orders through GECAS, some fairly strong market outlook figures for that aircraft going out to 2030 in excess of 150 units, which is more or less in line with what IBA's projections are. So that's obviously a very exciting market development. Then, of course, there's the pickle fork issue with 737NGs and the announcement that Boeing wouldn't be supporting aircraft or the STCs of non-Boeing modifications. However, the good news is that shouldn't really affect the converted fleet of 737-800 SF, BDSF, BCF aircraft, because, of course, the pickle forks were in there manufactured by Boeing in the first place. So they're the kind of latest developments, if you like. Obviously, there seems to be more and more interest in the A321 P2F taking place. But if I move on now. Okay, so looking at the current fleet size or the composition of freighters in November 2019, you're basically looking at just over 2,000 aircraft if you take a parked and stored fleet as well, and around 1,770 active aircraft, give or take. Roughly a third of that, or just over a third of that, being the narrow-body segment, where you still have some very strong players, such as the 737-300 and 400 freighters. 737-800 freighter fleet's growing nicely. We're up at 19 units now, probably touching 20, given that even 2 months ago that was only about 14 or 15 units. So they're obviously getting aircraft out there. And of course, the old stablemate 757-200 still looking very healthy there, over 300 aircraft. Moving on to the mid-capacity wide-body aircraft, the real sort of major contributors to the fleet in that segment are, of course, the 767-300 freighter, which both in converted as well as original factory format is kind of like easily the most popular model, and was certainly highly regarded, consistently highly regarded amongst freight operators. But one shouldn't also forget the Airbus A300-600 freighter, which is a broadly similar capacity aeroplane with 168 units. That figure obviously isn't likely to rise because production of the host aircraft has ended, and conversions are not really likely anymore. There might be the odd nominal one here or there, whereas of course 767s are still being produced and the conversions are still taking place. We still have fairly nominal numbers of Airbus A330-200 and 300 P2Fs, but those numbers should rise to 3 to 4 each. Well, certainly 3 each for the 200 P2F and 3 to 4 perhaps by the end of the year. Moving to the large capacity wide bodies, the MD-11 fleet, around 115 active units, predominantly UPS and FedEx. The FedEx fleet may reduce a little bit over the next year. And of course, Lufthansa Cargo, we're still not quite sure what the fleet policy there is, whether they retire their MD-11s next year or not. But the major growth platforms there are still the 777 freighter, 176 units, so that looks like another 10-ish units from earlier on in the year, and a few more units, a couple more units for the 747-8F. So moving on, so looking at the current fleet size, November 2019 versus May 2018, i.e. 18 months growth, across all three sections, it's quite clear that there's been substantial growth. In the narrow body sector, you've got an addition there of roughly 50 units. Then you do need to take into account a small number of retirements of those older types. But clearly where you're seeing growth in the narrow body sections is still the 737-400 freighter, despite the fact people tell you that the feedstock's running out, which is true. But there are still conversions going on for the old 737-400 freighter, and indeed the 737-300 freighter, where we know at least 7 are earmarked for conversion through to the end of the year, if not early into the next. 737-800 freighter is obviously going to be a major source of that growth. Already that fleet's grown by 4 or 5 units over the last few months. 757-200s are also being converted in large quantity, as the figures clearly show. As we move on into next year and the year after, on the assumption that the Airbus A321 P2F is certified and has a successful on-time service entry, we ought to see more of those aircraft contributing to that growth as well. Moving to the mid-capacity sector, again, some perfectly respectable looking growth figures there. The one that really stands out the most, perhaps unsurprisingly, is the 767-300 freighter, both as a P2F as well as a factory freighter. As you can see, over 60 units between the conversions and factory freighters adding to the fleet, and a strong consensus that that's very much the popular mid-size wide-body freighter, both now and looking forward. Still quite nominal numbers for the A330-200 and A330-300 P2Fs, a couple of aircraft each, but we do know that there are more being inducted at the moment. So hopefully either by the end of the year or early into next, we should see, certainly for 300 P2F, those numbers head upwards by about 6 or 7 units. Moving to the large capacity segments, the real growth platform there has been the 777 factory freighter. That number, 176 versus 126, that's a lot of aircraft. It goes some way towards bridging the potential production gap between the current generation 777s and, of course, the 8s and the 9s in the passenger sector that are due. The 747-8 freight has also seen respectable growth levels, but I think everybody acknowledges now that production levels of that aircraft are relatively nominal, relatively speaking. MD-11F, a little bit of a decline there as FedEx perhaps begins to park 1 or 2 aircraft. And of course, Lufthansa Cargo still not quite sure what's going on there. Moving on, if we look at the trends with passenger conversions, and what we've done is we've prorated this because obviously we're not quite fully through 2019 yet. I think the important picture here to look at from this graph is that, yes, there was a bit of a slowdown 2009, 2010 from the first GFC. However, as the market began to pick up again, 2011, 2012, lots of 737 classics and 757s being converted. A little bit of a sort of constant, if you like, during the period 2014, 2015, but generally a picture of growth in terms of conversions. So that's obviously good news for the freight conversion companies. And do remember that the 2019 figure is only prorated, so you're likely to see that tower peak slightly above 2018 as well. And when one prorates the passenger to freighter conversions from 2017 through to 2019 to a monthly basis, it's quite clear that the rate of conversions has been on a steady growth path, as the last 4 blocks clearly show. So that's obviously again encouraging, and the 2019 figure looking so healthy simply because you've had an uptake in 737-800 conversions as well as 757-200, 767-300s, and indeed there are still respectful numbers of 737 classics being converted. You know, let's not forget that. So this chart further details the types of aircraft that have been converted in the last 5 years, and as clearly shows the types that were previously mentioned, the 767-300, 757-200, 737-800 now being a new generation aircraft, but indeed the classics as well, 737, 300s and 400s, still strong contributors towards that freighter conversion. So we thought it would be interesting to have a look at the total freight conversions for 2018 full year based on the Airbus and Boeing products. What we did is we took the conversion price, an average conversion price per type, and then multiplied it by the number of conversions. And the interesting figure is that nearly $650 million worth of conversions were performed that year of which the 767-300 ER series accounts for well over half of that in terms of dollar value. So we thought that was quite an interesting statistic to show. So if we take the total Airbus and Boeing freight conversions of the year to date, that's January 2019 up to the 1st of November for 2019, and we take those same Boeing and Airbus types again, you can see that we're up to nearly $560 million worth of conversions, and that's still with the better part of 2 months, perhaps a month and a half worth of conversions remaining. So there's still clearly a high amount of value in the industry. What's interesting as well is that the proportion of those conversions, the 767-300s, has come down a little bit as the market embraces newer generation, albeit smaller capacity obviously, but newer generation types such as the 737-800. But that's certainly not to say that the 767-300 is not popular anymore as a conversion. It's just that a large number of other types are now creeping into that table. So looking at the market growth forecast over the next 5 years, so it's basically from 2019 through to 2024, we do expect some substantial growth to occur, and obviously you've got some maturing products. We're very conservative at the moment on the A320 P2F because it's still very early days yet. So 14 might look like a very conservative estimate. The number could well be much higher than that by 2024, but we haven't really got a lot to go by on that yet. Whereas we think 35 conversions for an A321 P2F is perfectly realistic over the 4-year period that it should have been in service by then. Probably expect to see a slight decline in 737-300 freighters. Obviously that fleet's getting quite old now, but actually there'll probably still be more 737-400 freighters by 2024 because there is still a small fleet left out there in which to, or feedstock fodder basically. 737-700F, we do see more conversions. We see that as a little bit kind of niche really, whereas the 737-800 and all its iterations, whether it's a Boeing conversion, the BEDEC conversion, etc., you can see that goes up by a factor of sort of 6 to 7 by 2024, and you'd expect that as that's obviously clearly going to be the popular narrow-body freighter moving forward. And indeed the 757-200, yes, the fleet is aging. You do still have a lot of potential feedstock out there. People like Iceland Air, TUI grouping, United. There's a lot of decent aircraft out there that are, at some point do need to come out. A few more American Airlines aircraft. So we do see the 757 fleet still growing over the next 5 years or so. Moving on to the mid-size sector. The real kind of movers there, if you like, we still expect plenty more 767-300 series aircraft, whether that's through new delivery or conversion. There's still a lot of American Airlines aircraft out there that could require converting. And there are still some pretty substantial fleets of passenger aircraft on the 767 front out there. Slow, gradual kind of decline of A300, 600F aircraft, but whether you go from 180s, as you got there, to mid to high 160s, it's a nominal figure change really, and a whittling down the old DC-10, MD-10Fs. I think FedEx, they're going to start parking those a little bit early, so we've allowed for 5 aircraft just in case, you know, there's a nominal amount left there. Moving on to the largest or the high capacity aircraft. The main sort of source of growth there will be the Boeing 777F, substantial growth as the figures clearly show there. The 747-400 freighters, that figure does include the converted aircraft as well as the factory aircraft. As you can see, there's roughly a 10% decline forecast by IBA there, but we believe almost all of that decline will be for the converted aircraft and not for the nose loader. We see the MD-11 fleet continue to whittle down, perhaps as Lufthansa retires by then. We're still not quite sure what they're doing with theirs. Then, of course, there's space for another entrant. Will there be a Boeing 777-200ER P2F program? It's just not quite clear yet. I mean, it's obvious that the 777-300ER will have a conversion because, of course, the announcement was made 3 weeks ago for a conversion. The fleet, or the first examples of the fleet are due to enter service at the end of 2022. By 2024, it will still be very early days for that aircraft. So we have a fairly nominal number of 6 there, but obviously we do expect to see growth in that aircraft type. So overall, between the 3 segments, definitely a growth sector, if you like. Thought it'd be useful just to give a summary of conversion costs, values and lease rates. These haven't really changed substantially from last time's update. However, we do of course have the new entrant in there, which is the Boeing 777-300ER. At the moment, we've called it a BDSF, although the nomenclature may be subject to change because obviously it's going to be an IAI/BEDEC program. Our estimation of the conversion cost is 28 to 30 million on that. It's difficult to get absolute clarity yet, though that could obviously escalate if you add non-routine costs, etc. For us, the value range would expect for in around 2023 for a Boeing 777-300ER freshly converted would be about $54 to $64 million. And our lease rate range would be between 680,000 to 760,000 dry rental per month in 2023, that is, for that aircraft. So of course the other question is, where's all this feedstock likely to come from? Well, we haven't really changed our view on the established players, which we updated earlier in the year or a couple of months ago. But obviously what we thought we'd do is for the 777-300ER, we thought that by the time you get to 2023, the early aircraft will be kind of those 2004s, 5, 6 and 7 vintages. We thought, well, who's got aircraft that fit that kind of vintage range? And you can see Air Canada have 6, Air France 24, Air India 3, All Nippon has 11, Cathay has 4, there are 19 at Emirates. So it goes to show it shouldn't just be assumed that all the P2F aircraft will come from Emirates, because obviously Emirates has quite a new fleet as well. Etihad has 5, EVA's got 6, JAL, Japan Airlines 6, Qatar only 2 actually, because they've got quite a lot of newer aircraft, and 11 fairly early builds with Singapore Airlines. Now obviously this is just a pure number of aircraft that are with that airline, regardless of whether they're leased or owned. And we're not saying that those aircraft will definitely be released from those operators. What we are saying, though, is that these are the early build aircraft, 2004 to 2007 build with the major operators. Obviously, people like Air Canada, they might be committed to those 6 aircraft beyond 2023. Who knows yet? But certainly, if we were to go looking for our feedstock aircraft, we're definitely going knocking on the doors of those operators or the associated owners of those aircraft to try and find our feedstock. So the latest developments, the 737NG pickle fork issue. Well, the FAA guidelines stipulate that the 737NG aircraft with over 30,000 cycles require inspection and then a re-inspection. This affects around 1,200 737, 600, 700, 800 and earlier 900 aircraft, which have so far been inspected, and about 50 have been found with cracks. Without naming serial numbers or anything like that, the operators that have had plenty of exposure have been some in China, GOL in Brazil, Southwest Airlines, a couple at SAS, and closer to IBA's offices anyway, Ryanair. During 2019 in October, and again this came out in Cargo Facts, it was basically revealed by Boeing that they'd told customers that they might not be able to provide the FAA approval relating to structural repairs on aircraft modified by a non-Boeing company. It's early days yet, but initially some people thought that could place big limits on Boeing's support for third-party conversion houses modifying Boeing aircraft. However, we don't think at IBA this will affect the 737-800 and 700 converted freighter fleet, that the pickle forks were installed while manufactured by Boeing and not by a third party. So as such, we think the only effect there will be that if the converted aircraft have exceeded 30,000 cycles, they'll need to have those pickle forks inspected just as the passenger aircraft. But I would have thought as aircraft go through conversion, it would be wise to do the pickle fork inspection while you're converting it. Then you don't have to obviously redo the work. So in our concluding statements, Basically, we think the biggest kind of movement forward, if you like, from our last update is the launch of a next generation high capacity wide body aircraft in the form of the Boeing 777-300ER. The latest thoughts are that it should be in service by late 2022. That could be subject to delay. It's too far out to speculate that, but that gives you an idea as an estimation of time frame as to when that aircraft should be in service. And that's probably one of the most significant pieces of news in the cargo industry for the whole year, really. And finally, for those of you that don't know, I'd like to say a word or two about IBA IQ, which is our data intelligence platform that specializes in fleets, values, engines, and trends in the fleets. There's extensive market data, both for the current fleets, historical fleets, as well as trading data, leasing data, etc. We do a values platform in there, which gives you your current half-life and full life numbers, values across most turboprop and jet types, and as well as forecast values, which can go out virtually as far as you wish, basically, depending on the client's requirements. We've recently added an engines module across most of the popular later production turbine engines. And importantly, IQ trends. We think this is a very valuable function as part of the database, and it links such aspects of storage of aircraft with oil prices and so forth. If you're interested in taking a look, please feel free to register on our website or look on our website, iba.aero. Thank you very much and goodbye.